Right now, it looks
All right. Just give everybody a second to get on.
Mm-hmm.
And Jen, if you don't do me a favor and just send it to me in the chat. 'Cause I am not getting the email. But good morning. Welcome to the panel discussion, Fight the Power, New Memory, Keeping as a part of the Reimagining Archives, Impact of Black Voices in Community Movement, Arts, and Education. My name is Michael Morris, and I am the director of the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum and State History Museums. I'm honored to be the moderator of this panel, which features some pretty incredible guests. And so I'm going to briefly introduce each of them. First, we'll start with Zakiya Collier, who is an Afro-Carolinian archivist and memory worker based in Brooklyn, New York. They are a member of the Shift Collective, where they support communities and collectively developing cultural memory practices and designing sustainable programs to autonomously preserve and share their own stories. Their recent work includes serving as the first digital archivist at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, project archivist at Weeksville Heritage Center, archivist for the visual artist Marilyn Nance, and co-editor of a special double issue of the Black Scholar on Black archival practice. Zakiya is a certified archivist through the Academy of Certified Archivists, an affiliate of the Center for Critical Race and Digital Studies, and an Archives Advisory Board member for the LGBT Community Center National History Archive. They hold a BA in anthropology from the University of South Carolina, an MLIS from Long Island University, and an MA in Media, Culture, and Communication from New York University. Next, I'll introduce Trenton Malou Brooks, who is a father, scholar, and organizer. He has spent the last decade asking questions and utilizing the answers to provide a clear pathway into the future. As an anthropologist and a historian, questions are the foundation of his work. Constantly questioning leads to consistent learning, which in turn places Malou in his happy space. He was born just 20 minutes south of Houston, Texas, in LaPorte. Malou is a first generation American raised in a Trinidadian household. Early explorations as a child sparked an interest in global work that still burns through him to this day. He was and most importantly, this is how I know Malou. He was an archivist for the Our Story, Our Terms, documenting movement building from the inside out, which is a joint effort of Duke University Libraries and the SNCC Digital Legacy Project to document today's movement-inspired activist campaigns. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Malou attended Florida A&M University. Lastly, but not least at all, is our good friend Judy Richardson, who is a native of Westchester County, New York. She was a recipient of a scholarship to Swarthmore College, and it was there that she was swept into the modern civil rights movement. She began her movement work with the Students for Democratic Society, organizing around desegregating facilities on Maryland's Eastern Shore. And she was encouraged by a fellow Swarthmore student to join the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, where Richardson served in a variety of roles. She worked in Mississippi during Freedom Summer in 1964. She organized in Lowndes County, Alabama in 1965 and helped manage the office for Julian Bond's successful campaign for the Georgia House of Representatives. And that's just a small list of her accomplishments. But more recently, Richardson went on to become the series associate producer for PBS's Eyes on the Prize series. And she co-edited a really excellent book called Hands on the Freedom Plow, Personal Accounts by Women in SNCC. And so I just want to welcome each of you to this particular panel discussion. And just before I start with our question, I just want to read a short, brief welcome. Uh, and so these talks arose from what wowed Leah Kerr uh, while she was working on the OSOT project, which is the Our Story, Our Times project that I mentioned before. And we are seeking to help Black freedom movement groups to archive their work while in action as accurate documentation for themselves, historians, and other activists in the future. And along the way, we met artists, archivists, activists who were finding unique paths to amplify their voices with archival primary sources. Leah Kerr felt it would be a disservice for OSOT to go dark without shining light on some of these efforts. And so this conversation is just a taste of what is out there. Hopefully, it will be a joint inspiration and very practical how-tos for others to document, speak, paint, illustrate, recreate their experiences to add to the fullness of our striving for freedom for all. And so Leah wants to thank everybody for coming and for these speakers for being her voice as bronchitis has taken away hers, okay? And so with that, my first question, and I'm gonna start with you, Zakia. Um, let me get to my questions. Um, you know, I read a little bit of your biography. Obviously, you've been doing this memory work for a long time. I thought we'd start out by you defining memory work. And if you don't mind, could you compare the use of archival materials between your first involvement and now?
Okay, thank you, Michael, for the wonderful introduction, and thank you to everyone for being here, and Leah for the beautiful invitation to be amongst such great company. So let's see, how do I define memory work? I get this question a lot, and I while I'm consistent every time, I'm sure my wording is a little different, but I think I'll say that, I first encountered the word memory work in an article whose title escapes me at the moment, but it was related to liberatory memory work in an article with Doria Johnson, Jared Drake, and Michelle Caswell. And that term has stuck with me, obviously, as I use it for my own bio as a memory worker and sort of facilitate a group of Black memory workers. And I think for me, memory work is a distinction from archival work in some small ways, but I think powerful ways. For me, memory work is a term that builds on a legacy of work that has happened mostly outside of institutions and done by individuals who care about the communities that they're part of and their families and the legacy of those communities lasting into the future, and seeing value in deciding to put in labor to keep those materials, to donate those materials, to steward them, put time and effort, move them when they move to different locations, organize them, keep people out of the front room to keep those materials safe. And recognizing all of that as labor is sort of the reason that I use the term memory work. I think that it is more than just sort of working with physical materials. It is the transference of oral stories. It is, helping to keep people alive and surviving so that they are able to continue to hold memories, share memories, and do this work as well. And as far as, let's see, the difference between could you remind me of the question? I know it was about archival materials at the beginning.
Yeah, just kind of comparing your first involvement with archival materials and then now. Um,
Hmm. Okay. So for me, I think my first involvement with archival materials was in my home, and sort of with the archival materials of my family members, of my own life. And so it was a very intimate process that I continue to this day of making sure that myself and my family members are documented through photographs. And journals, and my journal is like sitting right here, and interacting with these materials on a day-to-day familial and personal way. I think the way that that has changed is now I'm also sort of working with materials of people who are not my direct family members, and having the pleasure and privilege to be trusted by people to sort of interact with their, most intimate documents and histories, and to support them in that process. So yeah.
Excellent, excellent. While you were talking, a lot of people don't realize that a lot of times your home is the first place that you interact with what we now call archival materials. And what came to my mind was my experience growing up in our church, handling our church minutes and all that paperwork. And it's got me thinking, where's that stuff, you know? Malu, I'm going to shoot it to you. Same question. How do you define memory work? And then what was your first involvement with archival materials? And then compare that to where you are now.
Thank you, my dear Jackson, Mississippi brother. Uh, how would I define it? You know, for me, it starts from two angles, right? You have the history angle, then you have the anthropology angle. You know, history is from the written word, so that's why it usually starts with a European showing up somewhere. And then history, I mean, anthropology is the study of humans in general, right? But in both cases, the Black experience has been so bastardized that none of it actually makes sense anymore, right? So for me, this work is centered around reconstructing who we are, right? Defining memory of a memory that was meant to be lost. You know, like they wanted us to lose our own memory, and then they want the globe to forget what they actually did to us. So it's a two-sided battle. It's a historical battle to redeem ourselves historically. We were not swinging from trees before y'all showed up. In fact, we were living pretty nice. But then anthropologically, if you don't understand that the world started in Africa, then none of this other stuff makes sense either, right? So defining that is to define what has been lost, stolen, or forgotten in terms of our people, which benefits the entire globe. Um, that's the memory work. And then, you know, you got the right now in which every neighborhood, every community has like, you know, for lack of better words, a hood legend. You know what I mean? Like you can't go into a neighborhood and not find some elder or a young person whose story is phenomenal, who everyone in the community knows, but if it isn't collected, then it will be forgotten with the next generation. Um, my archival work honestly started when I began to organize with the Dream Defenders down here in Florida. My first position in Dream Defenders was a research and historian chair. So I began to archive. Funny enough, that's not what they meant in that position. They actually just wanted me to like take pictures at events. Um, they didn't explain it to me though, so I actually began to archive all of what we were doing in my city in Gainesville. We're a statewide organization then, we're nationwide now. But from 2013 to 2017, I had just collected every meeting, all of our minutes, so on and so forth, right? Just because I knew that we were living history, that we're doing historical things. Um, and now I have been opened up to the floodgates of what archival work is, why anyone on earth would major in Liberian studies. such a vast respect for those for that field now and the importance of it. And it's just really evolved. For me, majority of things I've archived in the beginning and now have been digital, not as much physical. So that hasn't changed that much, but learning the structure of archiving has been just an amazing opportunity for me.
And Judy, same question.
See, I probably, I'm more a recipient of the archiving. So let me plug in when you get more to the other end, the usage end.
Okay, gotcha. So back to you, Zakia. You do a lot of work in terms of helping communities protect their memories and protect their legacies. Well, first, how do you approach communities? Do you wait for them to approach you? And then what is the response that you get when you're talking to communities about preserving these documents that are so important to them?
Yeah, so I think it goes a little bit of both ways. There's times that people find me in the world. There's times that it's organic, we're just having a conversation. Someone asks what I do. I try to explain it in the least confusing way possible. And then I get confused myself sometimes in doing that. There are other times that I see a need there and, want to strike up a conversation with folks about what they're doing with some of the materials that they're creating or collecting, and, wanting to show up where I can. And sometimes it's just like, I'm in this meeting. I noticed this Google Drive has a lot going on in here. Can I please get in here and just do a little something that can help you keep up with things over time? So a bit more working with active records as well. And I think that generally for me, it's important for these conversations to be accessible and not so much about necessarily getting materials into an institution or anything of that nature, just sort of like finding out where people are in their process and where they've seen memory work and archives in their lives and work before. And one, way that I always think about like my own experience of learning what archives and using the word archives. So like always knowing archives intuitively, but not knowing there was a word for it.
Mhm.
But, as I sort of moved into knowing, just kind of thinking about like the images and documents that we would see in history books growing up and never thinking about the fact that like someone has these somewhere. That just is not a thought that I ever had. It's just like, okay, we see the picture of it. It's obviously gone now because
Right.
it's 200 years old. Like moving on, like next page. And so um approaching it sort of in that way, sometimes playful and just being like, we interact with archival material or things that are documented in archival material all the time. Many of us have things in our homes that have been passed down, things that we've kept ourselves, that, we don't always have in like our active mind, but like we did decide to keep it one day or grab this from our aunt's house because it belonged to our grandmother or
Mhm.
have you. And we just don't always think of it as an active process. So making sure that people are able to see that they already participate in this process all the time. Um, and I think once that sort of threshold is crossed, then I don't have to do any more work from that point. People are like, you know, I have this, I've kept this, like, what do I do about this thing? I think my uncle has blah, 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 blah. There's this storage unit that we haven't been able to get into, but I know that he used to collect blah, blah, blah. And I know it's worth something. I know it's valuable to someone. I know it expresses this piece of history. And then it's just a matter of, sort of figuring out like where where they are with it. Like, are they in a position to actively, start working with that material? Do they have other people sort of in their circles that can support them with that work? And yeah, what their goals are, and how deep they want to go, because we can go all the way there and we can start ordering boxes to your house like tomorrow. Or are you in a place where you just kind of want to, have some more access to the materials, or you want to be able to have conversations with family and community members to learn more about what's there. Or maybe you don't have materials and you want to find out how to, start getting at that history with or without materials going forward. So yeah, it's like it's all conversation based work at the outset before we open any boxes, take anything out of a sleeve, open a book. It's all conversation and like where people are, where people want to go, and how involved do they, want outsiders in that conversation.
Gotcha.
So
And
Michael, I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
before you move on, it just occurred to me listening to you guys, that I should probably, before I say that, let me just say, I'm so glad to see Zakiya when you mentioned Weeksville, because one of the many films I did after leaving SNCC was something on the History Channel, for the History Channel, which included Weeksville. And it was so wonderful going to that site. And of course, Malu, we've been working together for forever, seems like. And Michael, I just saw you in Memphis. But anyway, I just wanted to mention in terms of SNCC, one of the things that Dr. Emily Crosby, who is really key to a lot of the work we're doing on these booklets for our NEH series, what she early on said was SNCC was probably the most documented of the civil rights movements of the 1960s. And the reason that happened was because, first of all, you had Ruby Doris Smith Robinson, who sometimes was called the General, and who ran that office, right? She was a Spelman student. She had done, 30 days jail no bail in Rock Hill, South Carolina. She had been on the Freedom Rides, did parts from prison. But the other thing was she was the strong administrator of that office. And so in order to get your little $10 a week, which was $9.64 after taxes, if you even got that, what she said is, I got to have reports. I got to have receipts for this. I got to have this. And people had such respect for Ruby Doris, and also because they wanted that little 964, that there is a mass of material around SNCC, who we were, what we did, and why we did it. It's the meeting minutes. I mean, when I come down, I become foreman secretary. And so I'm, this is before a lot of stuff that people know now. So I'm typing it on an IBM Selectric, right? I had my first meeting was 30 minutes, 30 pages of minutes, because I was so in awe of all the SNCC people who were there that I'm listening to every word. And because I knew what was called Greg shorthand, right? I'm taking everything down verbatim. All of that is now archived. And there's this wonderful archive called the Civil Rights Movement. Well, it used to be called Civil Rights Movement Veterans, crms.org. Okay. Bruce Harford, who is on our SNCC Legacy Project board, he collects everything. He's going everywhere, trying to collect stuff and putting it in one place, which is now on his site. It's now on our SNCC Legacy Project website. But those are the archives, so that when you can, I just saw an 8-page copy that Dottie Zellner gave me of a big major staff meeting, right? Now, I don't remember some of the things that I see there, but you see the disagreements. You see all of the little stuff that does not get, in some ways, does not get included in most, not all, but most of the scholarship that comes out about SNCC. But what's wonderful is that because we archived it, it is somewhere, so that people really do want to research this, can change, the general narrative about how a lot of this stuff happened. So anyway, so I just wanted to say, and also we had Jim Foreman, who was our executive secretary, who always kept saying, write it down, this is history, right? And so always I never thought of it because I was 19 years old then, right? But he's thinking about it as this is history. We have got to record our own voices in this. So I just want to mention that. Yeah.
And let me just take a point of personal privilege to just back up everything that Judy just said, and to also say that they're having SNCC digital toolkit workshops all across the country. And I want to specifically plug the workshop that's going to happen here in Mississippi next April the 26th, right here at the two Mississippi Museums. And we're going to do the Black Power Toolkit. And so everybody's invited that's online here. And yes, you can go to the SNCC Legacy website and see all those resources that Judy just spoke about. And Judy, while I got you, I meant to ask you earlier about whether or not, well, you talked about previously before the Eyes on the Prize documentary, you worked on the Weeksville documentary on Weeksville?
No, actually, if I don't know if this is out of order, because I was
Go
going to.
ahead.
Is that okay? Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I run two tracks, as you know, so it's education, so it's the NEH Teacher Institutes and all the stuff, but it's also the filmmaking. And so I just finished, I and the team at Northern Light Productions just finished the new film for the National Park Service site here for Frederick Douglass. So we just finished that, and we're now working on 4 other films for the World War II, Blacks in World War II, and the Memphis Museum expansion, and there are lots of stuff. So I continue doing that as well as the education. But when after I left, and I'll talk when you get to that point, I'll talk about how we use archives with Eyes on the Prize. But with Weeksville, after I left Blackside, the Black-owned film company in Boston, I moved to Northern Light Productions, and with whom I'm now working, but from afar. And at that point, I brought in it was a History Channel documentary. And somebody from History Channel had contacted me, oh, we want to do, a film, a 1-hour film. And so they're asking me, and I said, well, I just joined, staff at Northern Light. Okay, I'll bring it into Northern Light. And what they wanted to do was a 1-hour on African-American history. And it was going to be with Jim Horton, who was this wonderful public historian. And he was supposed to be doing a travel guide of Black history sites. Now, of course, Charlie Cobb, SNCC person, did another one after that, that is absolutely incredible, because his on the Freedom Trail, or I cannot remember the name of it, on the road to freedom, Charles Cobb. But that had not been done yet. And what's wonderful about Charlie is, he's a journalist. So you have all these wonderful sidebars and all that stuff. Okay, but with Jim Horton, back then, it was like 2001, maybe. I had just done the film for the African-American Museum of African-American History on Beacon Hill in Boston. And I conceptualized and produced this film for their visitor center experience. So then I get this thing about Weeksville. Okay, but they don't know it's Weeksville. They just want 1 hour on, am I going on too long?
No, continue, please.
Okay. All right, because I need to shorten things. They asked for they want to do in 1 hour African-American history, starting with enslavement, Harlem Renaissance, Black cowboys, Montgomery bus boycott, civil rights movement, and there was something else in there in 1 hour. So I say, well, no. Okay, let's just pull this back. We'll do everything antebellum. And of course, always, because of my training in SNCC, you don't just talk about, oh, Buchanan scorned and, oppression, you always talk about resistance. So, so we started with Boston, but then I was asking the National Park Service person, because Jim Horton said, well, why don't you check, his name was Pitt Carthy, I think he was the National Park Service historian. And I said, we're thinking about maybe doing, so we did Weeksville, which was wonderful. And there was that wonderful, the Black woman who preserved it. And, we're looking at these things that we shot. Of course, we shot it all on site, and we're going through with her. And then we also found there was this amazing film that, too much information. Bottom line, I was so impressed with Weeksville. And so we put that as one of the segments in that film. Okay.
Gotcha. Appreciate that. All right, Malou, I got a question for you in terms of
yes,
the work.
Joan Maynard. That's it. Thank you.
In terms of the work that we did with the Our Story, Our Terms project. And so you had the job of having to archive a collection with the Dream Defenders. And this is an organization that you actually organize with, work with. And so it had its pluses and minuses, didn't it? Could you kind of talk about the challenges and the upsides of working or archiving with an organization of people that you know intimately?
Yeah, yeah, man. I'll start with the downsides. Um, to Zakai's point, when I explained to people that I was an archivist, they didn't understand what that meant. So I just told them I was a guy in the basement of the library that no one spoke to and no one talked to. And they was like, "Oh, I know what you talk about." I was like, "Perfect." Right. So I think the first thing would have been in terms of difficulty, just and it wasn't that hard with the basement statement, but just getting people to understand what the archivist is, and then how did we come to this point, right? Dream Defenders was 10 years old when we started this. So explaining to them that SNCC started 50 years in their archive, right? So their whole goal was to make sure we didn't have to go through this. But at the same time, my organization is still very, very active. So a lot of the key people I needed information from were so busy.
Mhm.
They were so busy. A major unexpected obstacle that we had was that two of our original content creators, two people that are originally on Dream Defenders comms team, communications team, are pretty big people now, right? They were very broke 20-year-olds a decade or so ago, but now they're both actually working with Eyes on the Prize and HBO, and the conversation around intellectual property came up, right? Because HBO wants something and HBO is going to pay. We want this and we're not going to pay. um so it did become a space where, you know, you do start to feel, not me, but folks felt kind of upset with the process because, you know, a lot of us got to where we are because of Dream Defenders. But at the same time, you got to protect the content creator. You know what I mean? And that was a debate that I had to go through so that yeah, so we just didn't strong arm our content creators. It's simple. And again, I don't want to make it seem like we wanted to strong arm them, but there was a level of explaining and understanding that had to come with why the person that took the camera, made the photos, published it, just because they were Dream Defender doesn't mean it's Dream Defenders content. You know what I mean? And that was just a major thing, especially not being able to get some of that content. Another negative was, man, we had a couple hard drives that were corrupted that we couldn't fix, that we couldn't get back. A real tragedy. And then the time commitment, right? I think the OSOT project wanted us to work like 5 hours a month or something, right? Um, It'd take me 5 hours to upload a hard drive, let alone start to label it, break it down, put it in the categories, put it in sections, do it by year, say who's in the photo, like, yo. So it just wasn't conducive, but Dream Defenders was really, they really helped and was a great assistance to me on that, to make sure that I was compensated for just the sheer amount of time that it took. And our archive is still living. You know, we're still adding things to the archive. We actually, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, we sent a couple boxes to Duke. So the archive is ever living. The positives were I lived a lot of what I was archiving. I joined the organization a year after it was founded, and I I was reinvigorated, to be honest with you. I wasn't organizing at the time that I was doing the archival work. I'm now one of Dream Defenders national organizers. So
Congratulations.
Yeah, so I'm back in the mix, and really it was being in that archive and seeing how much amazing stuff we have done. Also seeing, some of the things that I as an individual or we as an organization left on the table and how those things can go back, how I can go back and, reclaim some of those and make new some things. Um, and embracing the wins. Sometimes when you're doing this work, it gets dark, it gets heavy, it gets agitating. But we've done some amazing things. And one thing I knew when I was in it to where I am now, I knew we were doing historical work, right? Um, so to be able to be a part of an archive where the OG Snick also felt like we were doing good enough work to be a part of this, nothing was more motivating. I had so much support, especially because I've been in an organization for so long. Anything I needed, I had access to. I know some of our cohorts did not have that same leisure. Um, so it was a very loving process, and yeah, I'm still an active archivist.
Yeah, man, you hitting on something special there. I think that was one of the things that stuck out to me the most was being able to reconnect with friends I haven't really talked to in 10 years and really reminiscing and, like you said, trying to count those victories. Even in the midst of loss, um, you know, the time that we spent struggling together, those times were special. Those are times that we'll share. And when we were going through those documents, it just brought back memories of just being working, doing the work that we were doing in 2014. And so, yeah, I thank libraries and John and Leah Kerr and all those good folks for inviting us to participate in that project. It really was something special. So Zakiya, I'm gonna come back to you. Um, what are some methods, and I want you to listen to this question closely. What are some methods that you've seen, used, and deleted? All right, some methods you've gotten rid of too, from your experience capturing Black stories.
Hmm. Okay. Seen,
Seen,
deleted,
used, and
used, and
deleted.
deleted.
Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna start with deleted.
Okay.
And I think I'm gonna start there because I think early on in my archival career, um, I was deleting some of the things I was learning while I was actively still in library school. Like soon as it went in, being like, that sounds like a whole lot of whiteness to me. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna learn it so I can get a job when I graduate.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm gonna delete it as far as how it's actually going to be implemented in my practice as an archivist, especially when working with Black communities and other marginalized communities. And I think that what that means is sort of when I'm working with people, meeting people, like I mentioned before, like meeting people where they are. And we want to preserve as much as we can. But, people have a right to say, I don't want this preserved. And, I recognize its importance. I lived it. I loved it. But, I don't want that preserved. And that's okay. Cool. Um, is there, working with people to say, is there some other way you would like to reinterpret it so that, a piece of it's preserved, whether you want to create art connected to it? Do you want to write a poem connected to it? Do you, want to have an oral history where maybe you allude to it, but you don't go deep into it, and that's fine too. And also, working with people as far as their overall preservation of materials. And, if we have several wonderful sort of principles in archival work. And sometimes they just don't work for people that are not doing this work in an institutional space. And even sometimes when they do decide to donate, there is some sort of negotiations to have to be made, sort of like Malu was talking about, you know, with intellectual property. And sometimes people feel like, you know, I don't want to just have my name listed here. I want everybody's name listed here. And it's like, well, okay, we listing everybody's name then. It's like, you know, and yeah, whereas maybe we would normally just list the creator and maybe have everyone else's names listed as like associated people, and they're like, nope, I want everybody to be up top. And it's like, okay, well then we're gonna make our own finding aid in this case, and we're gonna make it look how you want it to look and not maybe how it would look traditionally. And so that's deleted. I think, well, I guess that was both deleted and used. Some of the ways, the things that I've seen, some of the things that I have seen, yeah, I mean, I've seen people keep items in whatever they have in their house, and that might be Tupperware, that might be, you know, saran wrap, that might be, you know, multiple pictures in one frame and they're not separated and like the nice, you know, sort of different
The archival materials.
yeah, like they all in there, right? And they're, you know, they're wanting to put this context together. Maybe they're not all pictures from the same time period, but there's like a story being told with why all these images are in the same frame. And they're not in there with a border or anything like that. They just boom, boom, boom. We got these pictures here, or we have, you know, these materials together that maybe normally wouldn't be put together, but there's a specific story that's being told or a context that's being shared. One of my more contemporary favorites is sort of the number of Instagram archive pages that exist in the world where people are making archives more accessible and sharing either like personal and family and community archival material, or they are welcoming other people to submit photos and stories to share. Some of these folks are doing like difficult archival research and going to find images and histories that tell the stories they want to tell about their communities, whether it's, you know, their specific identity that they feel isn't being well represented elsewhere, or it's difficult to access for a number of reasons. And they're like, I'm going to create an Instagram page because this is where people are and this is where they're going to see it. And yeah, that's just something like I really appreciate, because it's, you know, a way that you can at the same time, you know, see what your best friend is doing, and then, you know, see what someone in your neighborhood was doing 50 years ago. And yeah, just like in the same, just having all these different timelines conflated. And I think it provokes questions. It creates its own archival community of folks that are now interested in this history and supporting each other and doing more research. So yeah.
It's excellent. It's excellent. All right, Judy, I have a question about your experience making eyes on the prize. Of course, my first question is, was that your first time interacting in the archives? And then my second question is real similar to what I asked Malu. What were the challenges, and then what were the upsides of like making a documentary that features people that you knew, that you know, that you had intimate relationships with?
Got you. Okay. Well, first of all, yes, it was my first time in filmmaking. I mean, the reason, for people who don't know, this is a 14-hour PBS series, right? It was the first time that you ever saw anything about Emmett Till. This was we started in 1979, but the first 6 hours airs in 1986, and the second 8 hours, Eyes 2, airs in 1990. Gets an Academy Award nomination, Emmys, all that kind of stuff. But I come on board not because I know anything about film, which I don't. I keep telling Henry Hampton, the black head of Blackside, Henry, I know zilch, zed, nada, nothing about filmmaking. but he hires me because he assumes that, I'll be able to connect, that people will return our calls, people from the movement, because maybe they will know us. Now, I only know the SNCC people, right? And I don't even know all the SNCC people, but I don't know some of the others. So I am learning as I go. And for the first 6 months, I'm the only employee. I'm reading everything I can get. At that point, the only film on the movement was Montgomery to Memphis. And it was all about Dr. King, but only Dr. King, right? So when he went to Birmingham, you did not see Reverend Shuttlesworth. When he went to Selma, you didn't see Mr. and Mrs. Boynton. You only saw Dr. King. So one of the things that Eyes on the Prize does is it changes the narrative. So it places it absolutely in the local people who were the ones who led, not just the troops, but who led and then continued the movement. So I get in, and one of the things to know, and the reason it's my first understanding of archival, is that Henry Hampton, who had been on the Selma March, his thing was there will be no recreations. So everything that you see in Eyes on the Prize is footage or documents or people talking about it. There are no recreations. Now, the one I just did for Frederick Douglass, lots of recreations, because hello, it's antebellum and through Reconstruction in the 1890s. But we were not allowed to do any of that in the 14-hour of Eyes on the Prize. Now, of course, it restricted the stories that we were able to tell, because if there was no footage,
Right.
we could not tell that story. Okay, so, but what we found is that, and I'll mention just 2 stories related to this. With Eyes 1, at that point, with Eyes 2, I stayed in Boston. And so the whole series, I was there. But Eyes 1, I was going back and forth between Boston and New York, because I was also communications director for the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice during a lot of police brutality, even more, it runs in spades. And so this is a big one. And so it was Amadou Diallo. It was just a lot of stuff. But I'm going back and forth. And at one point, I'm kind of not arguing. I have a discussion with one of the producers, and it was with the Montgomery bus boycott. And I had said to her, what Dr. King is going into is a highly organized Black community. And she said, well, there's no scholarship to prove that, because we had not yet gotten the local movement scholarship of Charles Payne and John Dittmer and all the folks who followed, right? So she's saying to me, because everything we did in Eyes had to be validated by something. So luckily I had a friend, C. Gerald Fraser, one of the first Black reporters at the New York Times. Took them a while to get somebody. But he mentioned that he knew of something at the Schomburg, talking about archives, something at the Schomburg that had been an unpublished manuscript. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I think he knew about it because it was somebody who was doing a study of Black press coverage of the Montgomery bus boycott. In any event, I go there, I find it, I take notes on this unpublished manuscript, and I send it back to the producer. And as a result, you get that line, which is, it was a highly organized Black community. Now, I had also done finally, I'm looking at Stride Toward Freedom when I'm sitting there as the only staff person for 6 months, knowing nothing about film. Okay. And so I'm sitting there reading Stride Toward Freedom. And of course, it's all about men. But I find the name of Joanne Robinson, who is the co-chair of the Women's Political Council. And it's like, I am so excited. A woman, right? And so then the question is, how do I find her? I asked Gerald Fraser, I'm doing this and that. I call people, and then finally I find her in Los Angeles. She's on the phone, and she starts telling me the story of the first day of the boycott, which I won't go through. But not the first day. What happens when they find out Mrs. Parks has been arrested? Because they have already organized telephone trees. If this happens, this is what we'll do. And she is co-chair with Mrs. Mary Fair Burks. Okay, so I'm listening to her. We get her as the person who talks about the women's role, but it's also the grassroots local organizer, because Dr. King doesn't know nothing about organizing, right? He's a preacher. He just come from BU, Boston University. What he comes into is Black community that is organized, churches, social clubs, voter rights, All of that is what he's coming into. And an E.D. Nixon, who worked with the Pullman Porter's car. But what you do through these archives is you find that you can substantiate through the oral histories that you do with people who have never been contacted, as well as the footage. You can show that these are regular people, just like the folks who are viewing it, like their cousins and their mothers and whatever, it was not just Dr. King, right? So that was eyes one. Eyes two, I had proposed as the Howard, that was the 8 hours, that we do as the college takeover story, Howard University. Because in fact, we could have done Cornell, we could have done San Francisco State. Which one do you do? And so I propose we do Howard, because we're not always talking to white people, right? Sometimes we're talking to ourselves to get ourselves right. And so at Howard, there's a takeover. One of the major organizers is Tony Gittins, who is now doing wonderful work for the last 35 years as founder and head of the Washington, D.C. International Film Festival. And is, by the way, married to Jennifer Lawson, SNCC person from Tuskegee, who is on our SNCC Legacy Board. Okay, so Tony at that point was at Howard. And so I knew him from our Drum and Spear bookstore. And I'm saying to Henry, it's now, we're now doing the real series, it's 1986. I said, don't do the white takeovers, by Black people at white institutions. Let's talk about the Black institutions. Because at Howard, you couldn't even play jazz in the music room, right? It was considered low music. There was no Africana studies, not just at Howard, but just about all. There were no Black, there was no Black studies curriculum, okay, at these Black universities. So one of the things the Howard takeover is doing is saying we need to have Black studies at this Black university. It is not just a Black Harvard, right? So, so I almost lost the film. He agreed to it. Henry Hampton agreed to have this, but I almost lost it because we could not find footage that I had been told was there, right? And of course, since we don't do recreations, we got to have footage. So I called a woman at the local network thing. And I said, I can't remember if it was ABC or NBC. And I said, I know they covered it because the folks we're interviewing say there were crews there. And she said, let me find out. She said, she looks in the logs and she says, yeah, we had 3 crews there. She tells me the days. It was March 1968. And she says, but I don't know why. She allows us to get access to a warehouse in Southeast DC. We hire a Howard University student who goes in. He finds, now he says, it is horrible. He said, you can see rat droppings all over the warehouse, all that stuff. But he finds this reel, a canister with 16 millimeter film in it. And we are able to do it. Now, subsequently, Sam Pollard, who's now a famous film producer, he finds on one of those cards that we get from archive houses that in fact he had seen it, he just overlooked it. But we were about to lose it because we did not know it at that point. And so we get it, we transfer it, we do what we have to do. And as a result, we were able to keep the segment, And I'll talk about hands in another way, if you ask me.
Hey, Zakiya, I want to come back to you because you touched on something earlier when you were talking in terms of, it seemed like you were pointing out like a clash between, does one prioritize protecting the collection as opposed to the desire for the community to maintain autonomy over the collection? Could you kind of flesh that out a little bit? I'm thinking of some personal examples that I've run into, but are there some examples that come to your mind that you had in real time?
Let's see. I'll think on that while I'm beginning to answer. But I think that there's a concept that we use sometimes in archival work called, the right to be forgotten, right to be remembered, right to be forgotten, and thinking about, just that, people can decide. I think about something that I regret, but destroying one of my childhood diaries, like when I was in high school, because I was just like, I don't associate with that girl anymore. She was going through a lot. A lot going on in this diary, so I'm gonna destroy it. And then adult me is kind of like, dang, I would have loved to, read that and kind of know what was going through my head. But I have other archival materials, so I'm good. But yeah, I think that, people have their own, autonomy around, what they want to be out there in the world about themselves, despite sort of the world we live in with social media. And we don't have a whole lot of liberties in terms of that control sometimes. And sometimes things end up out there that we don't want to. But archivally speaking, yeah, there is that right to say, you donate materials to an institution and you're like, you can have these 3 boxes, but this box over here, we're going to keep this at my house because there's some personal things, or maybe I want to wait until, I leave the earth side of things, or these other people leave earth side, and then I could tell these stories, which, it gets really complex because we don't live on the planet alone. So the stories we tell almost always involve other people. And they also have that same right to be remembered and forgotten. So it's always like a negotiation of, what we share, what we want to be shared, what we want to be available for people to sort of tell historical stories. And what we want that story to be based on like what we experienced, or yeah, how we want to be remembered. And I think that that happens on a personal scale, but also like on an organizational scale, where an organization may not always have the same capacity as a university archive or library. They don't have the financial resources to maybe hire a full-time archivist, and so they have volunteer archivists or part-time, or just some really committed people who would never describe themselves as archivists, but they know everything in these papers, and they are gonna, they're gonna die about these papers. Like nobody they're not letting anything happen to it, unless they are a part of that process. And there are church groups like that. There are, groups that are organizing to like improve material conditions for their communities. Yeah, any type of time people get together, that you can run into this situation. And I think that even though sometimes they don't have the same resources, they know that they know their level of commitment, and they believe that level of commitment, that level of deep knowledge and experience is not going to be the same, necessarily at another space, with another steward. And so they are deciding to maintain and steward these materials themselves. And they have the right to do that, whether it will, whether the space will look like an institutional archive in the same way. It might be in a smaller room. Things are a little bit closer together. You have to pull things out of that room in order to actually look at them. But again, they're not letting anything happen to that room or those materials. And so, yeah, I think sometimes they're just like, there has to be a certain value put on that commitment and that deep knowledge. They're going to find a way, out of no way oftentimes, to make sure that they get what they need. And, they know where to find archival boxes, and they get what they need to get when they can, and then make the best of their resources. But, they just like individuals have that right, also have the right to maintain ownership and stewardship over their historical materials.
Absolutely. We're at the 2:30 mark, and I just want to tell the audience you can go ahead and start sending in questions. I've got a few more questions, but I just want to get the audience thinking about what they want to hear from these great panelists we have here. And Malou, you put something in the chat here about the Clotilda slave ship, which I can't wait to go down and see that exhibit that they have down there. Could you kind of talk about what were you talking about that in relation to what I was asking Zakia? Gotcha. Go ahead.
Yeah. And let me know if y'all can hear me. The rain is starting to fall on me.
Where are you, by the way?
I live on a farm, my dear brother, and I got the tin roofs just for the acoustics. It's terrible for Zoom calls, but yeah. So I think the Clotilda is a phenomenal example of that question because, you know, for people that don't know, the Clotilda was the last slave ship to come into the United States. It came in 1859, possibly the luckiest Black people in American history. Oh, you know, they only had to endure slavery for 1 year. But the way the story is told is they brought the ship over because of a bet. And the bet was that they could still bring slaves over. But after they brought slaves, they sunk the ship.
Hey, Malou, I think you're breaking up on us a little bit.
He's
Oh
frozen.
man, he was just about to say something brilliant.
There goes. There goes.
Go.
Yeah.
Just
So
repeat what you just said, because you cut off for just a second there.
okay, so the Clotilda, they sunk the ship to hide the evidence. So within the last 5 years,
Uh-oh.
Well, Malou, we'll come back to you in just a second, okay? And
Great.
so, Judy, let's go to you. Let's talk about Eyes on the Prize as being an archive.
Yes, because I wanted to mention that what's wonderful about the interviews that we did, all filmed interviews, but some also over the phone, because you do a lot of phone interviews as you're figuring out how to shape these stories, as you find out more and more information from the people who actually lived it, because that is what Eyes was. It was, you know, always through the voices of the people who actually lived the events we're talking about. There are no scholars, wonderful as they were and as important as they were, but they are not on screen. So all of it are the people who actually lived the events. But so what you have, for example, and all of those archives, not only for the 14 hours of Eyes on the Prize, but also for the Great Depression series that we did, that Black Side did, which was, I think, 6 hours. It's the African American, I'll Make Me a World, African American Arts in the 20th Century. It's the anyway, there were a number of series that Black Side did. All of those interviews are at Washington University in St. Louis. And it's under the Henry Hampton Archives. So you will see the full interview that we did with Dr. Bernice Johnson Reagan, who recently passed. You would see, so some people who have passed, and it's not just the cut interview, it is the full interview. And what it has become is an archive. So every once in a while, I will see an interview that I know comes from Eyes, and it's in somebody else's film. Like the Fred Hampton, the Hampton and Clark segment of Eyes 2. When that feature film came out on the Black Panthers in Chicago, I'm seeing an interview that was taken directly from Eyes on the Prize because it has become its own archive. So I just wanted to mention that. And it's free. It is open access, free. Now, if you want to use it, you have to negotiate. If you're a documentary, you know, much easier. If you are, a network, you know, if you're HBO, for example, then you would have to, but the main thing is for research, it is absolutely open archived.
And I'll tell you, I actually use that archive just for my personal purposes and just for the work that we do here at the museums. And I recently watched the interview that you guys did with Stokely Carmichael. And he talks about riding through the Mississippi Delta with Amzie Moore, who tells him to reach under the seat while they're being chased. And he realizes that Amzie Moore was carrying a gun in that car. But that's just invaluable information. And, you know, I'd encourage everybody that wants to learn about guns, learn more about guns in the movement we plug Charlie Cobb's other book, but this nonviolent stuff to get you killed is a great resource. All right, we got Malou back. Let's, you were talking about the Clotilda.
Yeah, my brother, thank you. So I was just saying, so after they brought the Africans over, they sunk the ship to hide their evidence. So it was within the last 5 years that they actually went into the water and pulled the ship out. Now, a huge debate occurred: who owns the ship? Is it the Meyer family that brought the slaves over that are still
Right.
prominent people in Mobile? Is it the citizens and their ancestors who were on the Clotilda? Or is it the U.S. government because this is a federal crime? Turns out it's the federal government, and now it's at the Smithsonian.
Gotcha.
But the problem is, Mobile doesn't have anywhere to secure this finding, this archival finding. So it should be at the Smithsonian. That being said, we need more spaces where we can actually house our own things, and that's like a long-term goal for me. But I think whatever the material is, where can it best be as of right now?
Mm-hmm. And you reminded me of something important, Malou. One of the most powerful artifacts that we have in our Civil Rights Museum are the parts to the truck that Vernon Damer used to rescue his family when their house was firebombed. And every time that I see his son, Dennis Damer, he first of all reminds me that our Civil Rights Museum is state-sponsored, state-operated. And he tells me, hey, we can come and take those artifacts back at any time. And that's important to remember because when I tour folks through our museum, there's a panel below that artifact, that parts to that truck, that says this is on long-term loan by the Damer family. And it really does point to the relationship that we built with that family in order to put that on display. But it also points to how important they thought that story was, that they were able to place confidence in our curators to put that on display. So I'm glad you brought that up. There's always got to be this kind of ongoing conversation between the community and especially when we're talking about artifacts like that. Well, at this point, I think I'm going to ask Madison to pop in, and I see that we've already got some questions that people have already put in here. Madison, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. So we do have some good questions in here. So I want to start off with, and I apologize if I don't say your name correctly, but I want to start off with Miss Jo Levette. She says that she's been listening with her African American experience, 1619 to present students from St. Michael's College in Vermont. So I want to start off with those. The first question is for Miss Judy Richardson from Ty Gully. And the question is, what is it like to talk to major figures in history?
Oh my.
And you being a major figure yourself.
No, not hardly, honey. But what a nice question. You know, I mean, part of it was that I was surrounded when I was in SNCC by people who were amazing to me. You know, everybody from Mrs. Hamer to Miss Baker, who, you know, I have sitting up here because she was our mentor, you know, passed along her organizing philosophy of grassroots leadership from the bottom up, as well as her network of strong local leaders, you know, because she'd been director of branches for the NAACP. So I kind of was always in awe when I was in SNCC of people. And that was when I was 19 years old. And and I'm trying to think, remind me, is she asking, I should go to the Q&A because I think I can see it here. She's asking, because she's 19. Okay, fine. So as a 19-year-old, I am surrounded in SNCC by all these amazing people. Now, in terms of interviewing them, I would say it was more that, I mean, because we also did Malcolm X Make It Plain for American Experiences PBS. We've done a number of other films, both with Eyes on the Prize and with Malcolm X Make It Plain. I think I was just amazed at what I did not know. And that's even from the people that I worked with. You know, you know, with SNCC, you're working with folks who are your age. Most of them are your age, but you're all about the work. You know, when we're in meetings, we're not talking personal stuff. We're talking about the work. And so I didn't really know a lot where it's not so much the person, it's not so much being in awe of, or feel whatever I felt about interviewing famous people. It was more being amazed at the information I was getting from them that so expanded my understanding of this movement, this expanded movement. And I'm including Malcolm X Make It Plain in that as well.
Did you ever get a chance to meet Malcolm X, by the way?
Oh no, I went to his memorial, but I did not know him. Yeah. And no, I'm wrong. I did not go to his memorial. I'm making this up. No, I went to Coltrane's memorial, but I did not go to his. So, because we were still working in the South, I was still in Selma at that point. But I will say, because we're always talking to firsthand people, it always amazes me, about that. Can I just mention here with Hands? Hands on the Freedom Plow it's 52 women's stories. It's women. It's called Hands on the Freedom Plow: Personal Accounts by Women in SNCC, and it's on University of Illinois Press. It took us 15 years to do it, and all 6 of us co-editors were women who were staff people in SNCC. And when we sent out the original notice, 1990s, we send it out to 100 people, but we got only a few. And this again goes to the point of famous people. None of these were famous people, but what you got was this expanded understanding of the movement, because originally, and this also goes to archives, we only got a few. It keeps us in. But they tended to be from people who really were very comfortable writing, and as I said, we had 52 people at the end, but initially not a whole lot. And so we knew that we had to include a lot of different kind of folks in this book. We wanted to make sure local organizers were included in a major way. We knew that some of them didn't have time to write the piece, and then some were just not comfortable not comfortable communicating through the written word. And we also wanted to make sure that SNCC women, the whole fullness of our experience, was fully explored. So in fact, Dottie Zellner, for example, one of the co-editors, she brings Annie Pearl Avery up from Birmingham into New York, where Dottie is, and for 2 days they do an oral history with Annie Pearl, and then it gets transcribed, and then she checks the interview. Faith Holsart, another co-editor, goes back to Southwest Georgia, where she had worked and organized, and she interviews a bunch of folks for that Southwest Georgia section. So part of it, I guess, is that, yeah, there were some famous people, but I wasn't, because I had been around. SNCC had formed me with these amazing folks who become famous later, Stokely and, Ruby Doris and all those folks, Mrs. Hamer, Miss Baker, but they weren't famous then. It was just that I was amazed at their brilliance. And that was back then, yeah.
And in that same vein, we have another student, Denia Settles, who wants to know what happened to SNCC after Ruby Morris died, and how did it change?
It's not so much Ruby Doris dying, and she died at the age of 24 of a rare cancer. As I said, she had done, 30 Days Jail, No Bail, Rocky Mount. Not Rocky Mount. Rock Hill, South Carolina. Let me correct myself. Rock Hill, South Carolina. Community organization. So she had done all these things. But it wasn't that. And see, it's hard to say it died, because we have SNCC Legacy Project. The people that I saw, for example, with Michael Morris at the Memphis, a symposium that the Memphis Civil Rights Museum did last month. And I'm with Charlie Cobb, Cortland Cox, Dottie Zellner. All of us are still active. Dottie's doing Jewish Voice for Peace. Cortland is chair of the SNCC Legacy Project and all the stuff we're doing with that. Charlie Cobb is writing yet his next book, and that's around the intergenerational conversation. And then I'm doing what I'm doing. And so I'm around these people whom I've known for 60 years. And we, none of us are sitting knitting baby booties. Some may be doing that too, but we're mainly still in the world, still doing this work. And so I don't get a sense that SNCC ended. I will say that as an organization, part of it is that for me, I go back to school because I thought that people didn't quite know what was next. That we started going in on ourselves. At a time, I always knew that when people had an argument, it would always be around a particular position or a direction the SNCC should have. It was a political argument. It was not personal. At the point that I'm leaving, it becomes personal. I don't know where the organization is going. And I think at some point, the organization just kind of, which organizations do, but it didn't end because it's still with us and we're still doing stuff. And so I see it that way. But I think it ended for a variety of reasons, yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to combine a few of these questions. An anonymous attendee said, what advice do you have for students pursuing a career as an archivist, specifically within universities? And this is for all the panelists. And what piece of information do you value in regards to navigating these spaces while doing Black memory work? And we'll add in the question, what is the best conference to attend if you're interested in doing archival work? And what sparked your interest to do memory work? Is that too many questions at one time?
Were they aiming at anybody specifically?
No, whole thing.
It has to be Zakia and Malu.
Well, I'll hop in here. Yay for your interest in pursuing a career as an archivist. Come on to the dark side. We'd love to have you. So yeah, advice. So I would say to reach out to Black archivists that are in the profession, and just, informational calls. And I know some of my colleagues that are here are probably like, they're exhausted. We're all overworked. Everybody's overworked. But yeah, we are nice people and happy to welcome more people into our profession, which is still like 83, 4, 5, 6% white. So we would welcome more people in. We'd love to have you. So yeah, reach out to us. I mentioned earlier that I facilitate a group called the Black Memory Workers, which is about 200 plus archivists, curators, oral historians, etc. That we all work together, commune together, talk, organize events, and just show up to support each other. And one way through a monthly call, where we just like check in with each other and be transparent about the difficulties of being in this field and also the joys. So that's one space as well, which you can find on my website if you're interested. It's free. This is not a pitch for anything. And what information's value do I value while doing this work? So again, one being connected to other Black archivists and memory workers doing this work, if possible, being connected to an institution, Black institution that's doing this work, whether it's a cultural heritage center, whether their main role is not as an archive, but they have an archive, and showing up to their events, being in that space, talking to those people, and building community in that way. And also having to maybe create your own syllabus that, speaks to the things that you're interested in that may not be in some of the curriculum. And then my last piece of advice is, if something doesn't feel right and you feel like you want to point something out that's missing in the archive, in the curriculum that relates to your identity, to not let anybody stump that out of you or tell you that there's so many efforts to fix these things. And that is very true. There's a lot of great work happening around reparative work in the archives, but also things don't always feel great all the time, and that's okay to acknowledge. And I think the other question was, I don't remember.
It was
Uh,
like, what are some organizations like conferences that they can attend?
Conferences, yes. So for archives, the biggest conference is the Society of American Archivists annual conference, which this past year was last month in August, or this year, sorry, it was a month ago, in Chicago. I think next year it's in Anaheim, California. They offer some scholarships for students and also for archivists and students of color. Other conferences. Symposiums are the sweet spot. So spaces like this is where I prefer to be personally, where you are able to kind of get into these deep niche conversations with people who have lived real experiences and created the archives that we're talking about. Yeah, so I'll leave it there, but I'll add more in the comments as well.
Malou?
Yeah, yeah. I'll keep it short so you can jump in too, Michael, my brother. But yeah, when I was at FAMU, we were told that only 13% of Black history is written by Black people. So to Zakai's number, probably about 87%, not us. So in terms of the fields, I'd say anthropology, history, library studies. As just like a direct link to what to get you there, depending on what your passion is. Because I have to do archival work in all of those fields, right? Um, and even as an anthropologist, I had a chance to go to Sierra Leone, West Africa, and I was actually in this archival process while I was there. So when I went to their archive, I'm looking. You know what I mean? Like they have old old newspapers from 20, 30, 40 years ago that's just like spread out on a table because they don't have the facilities to put those up. As an anthropologist, I'm like, oh, cool, newspapers. As an archivist, it's like, Jesus Christ, someone get them some sheets. So, it's always archival work is everywhere in my work. But in terms of who sparked my interest or what sparked my interest, it was Malcolm X. I've always had a love for history, but when I was 18, I read Malcolm X's autobiography and the evolution that knowledge gave him while he was in prison, learning about our people, but then also having so many questions about what got us here. That's what sparked my interest. And I ain't stopped since. Hold on, Mike.
Oh,
Sorry.
snap.
We
Oh,
have,
what sparked my interest was when
oh,
I was attending Jackson State University, and I started working at this place as a student worker at this place called the Margaret Walker Center. And for those that don't know, Margaret Walker was one of the most outstanding Black writers of the 20th century. And I just needed a job. And so, but the director at the time took that opportunity to introduce me to this field that I really, really care about so much. And from there, I went on to work at a place called the Fannie Lou Hamer Institute at Jackson State with Dr. Leslie McLemore, another SNCC veteran, who I got a chance to learn all about the MFDP and this notion of the organizing tradition that we're still working out of. And Zakia took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to mention the African American Museums Conference because one of the things that I'm interested in exploring, and maybe me and Zakia can talk about this offline, is the relationship between the archives and the museum. When you come to our Civil Rights Museum, what you're seeing is a reflection of what's in our state archives, but also what's in the Tougaloo College Civil Rights Collection.
Mm.
And so I think both of those things are important. And lastly, I say I want to commend Leah and John and everybody at Duke University Libraries for putting this conference together. And I want to encourage them to continue doing this because Zakia is right. These symposiums are an opportunity to promote, working in the archives, but also to have these kind of in-depth conversations about the complexities of this work. And because at the end of the day, I think somebody mentioned the term labor, and that's exactly what this work is really labor intensive, and it can be very emotional. And so it's important that we get a chance to get together and talk about this stuff. All right, I'm done.
Okay. How has your work in memory work and archival work, how has it helped your life outside of the work that you do? And that's for everyone. Anyone can jump in first.
Okay, I'll just say, you know, and this was both with hands, but more recently with I'm sorry, with eyes on the prize, but more recently with hands on the freedom plow. I guess what I didn't understand as fully when I was in the movement, when I was in SNCC, was how grounded a lot of the local folk, the local young people, the local staff had been grounded in struggle, but also in African American history that I never got. So, for example, I'm coming from Tarrytown, New York, right? 40 miles north of New York City. Now, some things would have been the same. So the nationally prescribed textbook at that time at Sleepy Hollow High School was a book that showed the Reconstruction and was only 2 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs. And the only photo was something from the horrible racist Birth of a Nation film. It was a screenshot. Or from the Klansman, which Birth of a Nation was based on. And that, of course, it was, the enslaved people they couldn't handle Reconstruction. They couldn't handle directing government. They couldn't, because they were basically stupid and lazy. So I didn't get anything about what Reconstruction really was about, which, we've been able to put in a lot of films since then. But I didn't get any of that. But what I noticed about the young people that I was surrounded by, and I get this in hands, don't get it when I'm there, is how grounded they were with local Black teachers who taught them, or a particular professor, like Cortland always talks about Sterling Brown, the professor at Howard University, who brings the students over, and Gene Smith talks about that. Brings them over to his apartment, and they talk about jazz and literature and Black folks, and and he grounds them in that. It's not part of the curriculum at Howard, but he has taken it upon himself to do that. And in a lot of places, what I would see in Hands on the Freedom Plow is the way that their parents or their mother or somebody had grounded them in the strength. I remember when I first read Joyce Ladner's piece, and she talks about how she and her sister Dory, and Dory was, stayed in it even more than Joyce did, and Joyce continues being, at one point a acting president at Howard University. But what Joyce talks about in the Hands on the Freedom Plow book is how, she and Dory they're in Hattiesburg, right outside Hattiesburg, in a Black community called Palmer's Crossing in Mississippi. And, she said Dory they were 14 years old. Dory had just been getting her breasts in, and they're going to the local sundry, the local little grocery store. And they're looking through the magazine section, and the white store owner, or his son, I think, goes to grab at Dory's breasts. And Dory takes this bag of greasy donuts that they have just purchased and starts beating this white guy over the head with these greasy donuts, right? And so then they realize what they've done. I mean, this is Mississippi, right, in the early 1960s, and they haul off back home. And they're out of breath, and they say to their mother, they explain what happened, because they expect her to be mad, given what could happen to not only Dory and Joyce, but to her family from doing this with the greasy bag of donuts. And the first thing out of their mother's mouth is, "You should have killed him." Okay, now that kind of resistance that you saw throughout, I was kind of aware of it when I was there, but it is what came through in a lot of the work. It is Mama Dolly sitting over, with a shotgun over her knees, guarding the church with the mass meeting in Southwest Georgia, right? A lot of the voices of resistance I learned only through, because we didn't cover it much in Eyes on the Prize, but I learned it through the voices of the people we're interviewing and whose narratives are being told.
I think we're at the end.
Yeah. So Zakia, Judy,
I thought we were going to
Malou.
3:30. I am so sorry. We've not
No,
gone
you're
that
good.
long.
You're good. You're good. That was
Oh my
great. I'm
gosh.
glad you shared that with us. Thank y'all so much for joining us. This is going to close out this session. And Madison, am I missing anything?
No, I don't think so. We do have some more comments if you'll just allow me to read those.
Okay.
We have one comment from Kristen Nelson that says, I'm a Black American archivist who lives in Scotland. And she's been following Zakia for a few years now. And she has to say that the work you've done and continue to do has inspired me to take a closer look at the Black presence in the Scottish archives. I'll be starting a PhD next fall, focusing on this, along with gathering material to document Scotland's contribution to the Rock Against Racism movement that was held here in the UK during the late 70s and into the early 80s. Thank you for all you do. You too, Malou. I'll be following you too. Ida Jones wanted to share The House Where My Soul Lives, the life of Margaret Walker, speaking about African American in the memory work and storytelling.
Can I say, just while you mentioned Margaret Walker, For My People was like an anthem for the movement. It's an incredible thing. Okay.
Beth Castle, as someone working for 27 years, co-creating and collaborating with Native women in the Red Power movement using film, oral history, archiving, and intergenerational grassroots organizing, there's so much value and transformative wisdom. I hope we can connect on a cross-movement level as the next step of this massively important project. This webinar has to be the most important learning experience of my last few years. Thank you.
Lovely.
So that's all the comments.
Fantastic.
And yeah, that's it for today.
Michael, you want to just close it out? Just mention the next thing up at, I wish I could remember. We're doing a streaming, our next thing.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yes.
The next, is that Morehouse? The next.
That's the next actual one. We're going to have a virtual conversation with Cortland, Jennifer, and me. And that will be on September 30th, which I think is a Monday, September 30th. Yes, Monday, September 30th, 7 to 8 p.m. And it will be on voting rights and work in voting rights. So you can go on the SNCC Legacy Project website and sign up for that as well.
Absolutely. And I'll just note again that our in-person digital workshop toolkit here in Jackson, Mississippi is going to be April the 26th next year. And in February, they're going to have a digital workshop at Tougaloo College. And so I'd encourage you all to visit both of those. But like Judy said, you can learn more about that information. Jen just put the registration link in the chat. So that's
and last but not least, there is one more conversation happening today.
At 3:30.
At 3:30. All right, strengthening the Black involvement in the archives.
Okay.
Fantastic. Cool. This has been such fun. I've just enjoyed talking to you all. This is great.
Absolutely. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
I'm working. Okay.
Blessings.